Great. We've got about, I'm going to wait till 12:01. We've got almost 40 people who have joined so far. Great. Cool. I'll go ahead and get started. My name is Vicki Gibbs, and I'm the Executive Director for the Entrepreneurship Center at Keenan Flagler. And we have partnered with NC Growth, another center that's a part of the Keenan Institute, to bring you this Navigating the Great Pause series. And the purpose of this series is to connect all of the people in our community, that's business owners, entrepreneurs, employees, people who are affiliated with the university, and those in our ecosystem together during this time. And we know that it's a stressful time, but we also know that it's a time where community pulling together can really help. And we're here to be your partner and help connect you to resources. One of the things I will give y'all a heads up, my internet has been a little flaky today, as I'm sure all of y'all have experienced at some point during all of our marathon Zoom calls. So we've got some backups in place if I end up kind of going into too much of a pause. But without further ado, I do want to welcome our panelists. I'm going to actually let them introduce themselves. And we're going to go in, I'm going to say alphabetical order of their first name, just to keep it going. And really excited to have these experts for you today. Today for the Navigating the Great Pause, we are going to be talking about general operations as well as financial and legal resources. And we have some great resources from Hutch Law, the SBTDC, and one of our advisors for the eShip Center. So they are here to bring you their expertise and insights. I'm going to be getting questions from the chat session. So it's great to see your faces today. So feel free to turn on your video. And also if you have questions, feel free to enter those into the chat. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Ashley from Hutch Law to get us started. Welcome.
Great. Thank you for having me. My name is Ashley Pitman. I am an attorney with Hutchison PLLC. We work with a lot of early stage companies and entrepreneurs in the Triangle and further, across the country. I handle general corporate matters, but then also employment law for the firm. So this has been a very interesting time for the employment practice. It's been a little bit crazy. So I'm excited to be here and share some thoughts and what we've learned. Should I also go into my blurb, or are we going to introduce everybody first?
Why don't you go ahead and go into your blurb and kind of
my blurb.
Yeah.
Okay. So some of the things that I wanted to highlight are questions that I've gotten a lot. One that I've gotten from a lot of people is, can I be fired for refusing to go to work because I'm scared of the coronavirus? That is a very common sentiment, and unfortunately, one that I don't really have good news on. Yeah, if you refuse to go to work because you're scared, or a coworker tested positive, you can refuse to go to work and your employer can terminate you. If you guys are the employer, you can terminate folks for that. I would encourage you not to. It's not good for morale by any means. I would much prefer that you offer unpaid leave or working from home. But so OSHA provides for claims in the event that an employee refuses to go to work because of imminent danger. And so far, it appears that they're not deeming coronavirus concerns to meet that standard. So yes, if an employee just will not come in, you can terminate them, but I would encourage you not to. Another question we get is, can I take my employees' temperatures? Yes, the EEOC has indicated that you can during this time because we're in a pandemic currently. A lot of HR directors and resources are saying they would advise that you don't. And I think that's twofold. One is that, whether they have a temperature or not is not the only, factor. It's not the only symptom, and you can be asymptomatic and be carrying it. So while it might catch some cases, it won't catch all. And then also it might feel kind of invasive for your employees, especially if you're using an oral thermometer versus, the infrared ones on the forehead. If you're going to do it, I think it's preferable to do it with the kind that's, contact or whatever and not oral, but you technically can during this time. We're also getting a lot of questions about the paid sick leave and paid family leave benefits, of course, because the FFCRA passed a couple weeks ago now, and it mandates paid sick leave and paid family leave for folks who didn't have to do that before. North Carolina is one of the states that doesn't have paid sick leave mandated by law, which has been nice, but now we do, and the rules are not easy. So I'll start with, there is an exemption for small businesses. We had hoped that that exemption would be for all paid sick leave and paid family leave types. So far, it is only for paid sick leave and paid family leave taken for because you need to take care of your kid who, their school is closed, their child care, daycare, whatever is closed, and you take leave for that purpose. The exemption can apply for employers who have 50 or fewer employees and can establish that they meet the criteria that this would jeopardize their business to allow these folks to take paid leave. The criteria for that is you have to meet one of three factors. One is that putting that person on paid leave would jeopardize your business because they are, essential, or it would cause, workflow problems. One is that there are not enough workers other than this employee who are able or qualified to take their place and perform those services. And then the third is that the provision of this paid leave would result in the business's expenses and financial obligations to exceed revenues. So you don't have to meet all three. If you can establish one of those three and you have fewer than 50 employees, and the reason that they're taking the leave is to take care of their child because of school closures and daycare closures, then you are exempt. You should maintain documentation on that exemption for, when the IRS or the DOL asks you about it in the future. You don't need to send it anywhere currently. You should just retain it in your files. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that the DOL is going to permit that exemption to apply in cases where they take paid sick leave because they've tested positive or because they're experiencing symptoms or they've been put under quarantine. So in those situations, you are required to provide the paid sick leave or paid family leave as applicable. And that, I think, is largely because they're trying to limit the spread, obviously. So you're required to provide these types of leave. That said, you also get a payroll tax credit for doing so. And so you want to make sure that when you are providing this kind of leave, you're doing it only, in compliance with the rules that they've published. So, because otherwise you won't qualify for the tax credit. And if that's fine with you and you're willing to offer your employees more leave, great. But if you're counting on getting the tax credit, obviously you need to observe the rules around eligibility for these types of paid leave. In general, I would say the Department of Labor's guidance on all of this is super helpful. Unlike the IRS, they give very clear instructions and it's easy to understand. And so I would say, definitely peruse their website. They have a lot of guidance out there. I'll put in the chat a link to this long question and answer list they have that is super helpful. I'll drop that in here now. It is much easier to understand than most government guidance. So any questions you have, I would start there and then, branch out to experts, folks like us. So those are the main things I think that we're running into a lot of the questions is the exemption. Can I take folks' temperatures? Can I refuse to go into work?
Thanks, Ashley.
Mm-hmm.
FA, if you could introduce yourself and give us a little perspective as well.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon. My name is Frances Ann Critfield. I go by FA, and I focus my practice on executive compensation, corporate governance, and fiduciary matters generally, particularly with employee benefit plans. I have clients that have been going through a lot of the same things you guys have. We have folks who have been completely shut down, and there are a whole lot of issues and stresses around that. With your furloughed employees and laid off employees. And then I have clients who are an essential business and just can't meet demand. There's so much of it, depending on what industry they're in. And Ashley already kind of brought up some of the kind of individual, employee issues you have. I know I've been a little surprised at just how many people have diseases or disorders that include anxiety, because there is a hard time getting folks sometimes to come to work because of the fear. So employers have started to look at ways to encourage people to do this. One way is, obviously addressing the immediate concern, which is remind them regularly what you are doing in the workplace to make it safer. Any sort of cleaning, any social distancing, daily reminders of the rules that you've put in place in the workplace, and that can help ease the mind and get those workers back on the job. Another thing to think about is, especially for those of you that are busy and this is not really impacting you with revenue as much as others, think about rethinking your bonus programs, redoing, if you've got some discretion in your current documents, think about focusing those performance targets kind of on more immediate needs right now. You may also want, if you are not in that boat and you're struggling with being closed down, you may want to consider switching some compensation to equity. But there are issues with that as well. For example, right now, it would be probably really hard to figure out what your fair market value is under the 409A regulation. You could do that, and if you've got a third party to come up with a number, you could rely on that as a safe harbor when granting options to avoid the 409A penalties. But otherwise, you need to use your old 409A valuation, which may be significantly higher than what you might be able to sell the company for now in an arm's length transaction. In that case, you're going to issue options that are underwater from day one. That said, we can go back and reprice them to a correct price, following regulations in the under the tax code. But instead of doing options, if you're worried about that 409A valuation being way too off, you could do restricted stock. Estimate with good faith the fair market value of the stock now. Go ahead and have the employee pay the taxes through the 83B election. And if you need to adjust that price and the tax reporting later in the year when you do have the chance to get an accountant to help you with your valuation, you can do that, and it might be a little bit easier than repricing the options. Another thing to think about is when you're replacing cash compensation with equity right now, it's kind of hard to figure out how many shares should I give them, right? Because your market price is so volatile. So you may want to go back and use an average of what your fair market value has been over the past year or so, and maybe look at some projections as well as you're trying to ascertain, how many shares do I use to replace X number of dollars in compensation. One thing to remember on the fiduciary side is that wage and hour matters. Your directors can be liable for those. And in some states and in some cases with certain facts, your shareholders could be too. So make sure that if you are struggling to meet payroll, look at alternatives such as furlough, where your worker is still attached to the business technically, and you could even continue health benefits, but you don't have to meet those payroll obligations on salary through this time period. And as far as benefit plans, from my experience, I've seen most of the vendors are really on top of this. If you would like to make any sorts of amendments to your plans to cover COVID treatments, for example, if there are things you want to do in your 401k plan with respect to hardship distributions, there are rules that that you can make amendments right now to handle those. And the vendors are being really great at rolling out some kind of standard amendment documents and doing the administration of those changes pretty quickly. So reach out to your benefit plan providers and talk about the alternatives that you can give relief to your employees through the plans.
Great.
And that's all from me.
Thanks, FA. I appreciate that. That's awesome information from both you and Ashley. So next we're going to go to Latasha, who's from the SBTDC, and they've provided a lot of great resources around SBA loans and the payment protection, and she's going to go through some of those resources and talk through how she's guiding businesses at this point in time too. So thanks, Latasha.
Thank you, Vicki, and thank you all for joining the call today. So my name is Latasha Becker. I am a business counselor with the Small Business and Technology Development Center. We are a statewide business counseling service, part of the university system. So we have offices on all of your public universities throughout North Carolina, and we are part of a national organization of small business development centers. We are funded in part or cooperation through the Small Business Administration. So today I wanted to share a couple of key tips for businesses as it relates to COVID-19, and then I'll start. And then I will go into just sharing very specific information about the funding options that are currently available on the federal level. So first and foremost, as a business owner, one of the things you need to do is assess your business, and by doing that, really reviewing your cash management position. And so there are several ways to be able to review your cash management. And so being able to have conversations with your current vendors, leaseholds, or any current lenders that you are working with, being able to really have conversations and negotiate with that supply chain and those vendors, and then being able to have those conversations with your employees. I think both ladies, FA and Ashley, definitely made some good points as it relates to from an employees and employment side. So being able to have that conversation with those employees are really key. Being able to hopefully look at your current inventory is also key. In addition to that cash management position, the second thing is looking at pricing and cost containment of what you currently have, and if there's any opportunities to pivot from a brick and mortar to a online, or really being able to kind of look at what you can do differently from a pivot perspective. And so you can look at reducing any unnecessary expenses as it relates to the business, reviewing your current pricing structure, and then being able to negotiate any discounts with current vendors as possible. The next thing is really supply chain management. So reviewing those inventory levels, being able to really look at your point of sale systems, and being able to eliminate any kind of slow sellers, or consider kind of adding any faster times to your processes. And then the last thing, in terms of just kind of some key things into managing during a crisis, is marketing. So being able to let your current customers know that you are still in operation, but there are some changes, and being able to update how they can keep in contact with you, whether that is really reviewing your digital marketing or social media strategy for your business. So those are just some key things in terms of conquering a business crisis. So 1, reviewing cash management; 2, pricing and cost containment; 3, supply chain management; and then 4, marketing. Next, I want to just really briefly kind of go over what are some of the federal programs that are available. And so, as we all know, the CARES Act passed March 27th, which allocated $349 billion to these programs. As of this morning, so this is something new that I just got news from SBA this morning, that those funds have been exhausted for the EIDL, so the economic injury disaster loan. And so they are going back to our federal legislation for another $204 billion allocation. So keep in mind that there will be some additional funds allocated. So the programs that I am referring to, I'll talk about them in very general and brief. However, there is going to be another federal appropriation of funds for those. First and foremost, the SBA has created a loan payment relief. So if anyone has a current SBA loan or SBA guaranteed loan, with any lender currently, then, or when I say currently, prior to COVID-19, all of those existing borrowers will, the SBA is paying those loans, which means that it will not be on the back end of your loan or at the end of that note. So they are doing that for 6 months. So that will be a 6-month deferment or non-payment where the SBA is making those payments on your behalf for a 6-month period. Any new borrower, 6 months of payments beginning for the first payment due of the loan, but only for new loans made within the first 6 months on the date of the enactment. So which means prior to March 27th. So that's the SBA Loan Payment or Debt Relief Act, as we kind of call it. I will apologize in advance because we are starting to use a lot of acronyms as it relates to these programs. So I'll tell you what the acronyms mean, and then I'll tell you the acronym. So the next program is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, or the EIDL, which is EIDL, but they're calling it EIDL. Keep in mind that the eligibility for that is businesses with less than 500 employees. There is up to $2 million. The loans interest rates are 3.75, and the loan terms are up to 30 years. What they have done, and so there has been a lot of changes as it relates to the EIDL, is branched out and created what I call a subset, which is the EIDL Advance. So once again, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Advance. As of today, that is now a grant, which they were saying up to $10,000. That is now a grant or forgivable, meaning non-repaid back, but it is based upon the number of employees. So that calculation is $1,000 per employees. I am actually proud to say this week that I have gotten emails and correspondence from business owners saying that they have had those payments directly deposited into their account. So money is hitting business owners' accounts this week. So I can confirm that it's happening. But once again, there has been a lot of changes into it. So that is, the max is $10,000, and the way the calculation is $1,000 per employee, and this is forgivable. And that is the grant, or what they call the EIDL Advance. The next one is the Paycheck Protection Program, which is what a lot of people are talking about and applying for. The Paycheck Protection Program does have to go through your financial institution. The other two that I just mentioned are directly from SBA, where they're getting the funds from the U.S. Department of Treasury. The Paycheck Protection Program is going through whatever your current financial institution, and I say your current financial institutions because the majority of financial institutions are rolling it out to existing borrowers. There are a few that are going to open it up for non-customers, and there's a whole lot of debate of what that means for non-customers. But one of the things I will say is this is for payroll. So the calculation for it is 2.5 times your average monthly payroll cost. If you have anyone on payroll that earns over $100,000 or more, that will be deducted. So these are for any employees that typically earn less than $100,000. There's going to be some information to the side that Keisha's put in for our website at sbtdc.org, as well as the information. So I'm referring to two guides. The first is the Guide to Conquering a Business Crisis. The second is the SBA Emergency Loans, and it has a very good detailed detailed comparison chart that will explain all of this, but I will give what I know most attorneys will give as disclosure, since we have two attorneys and I am not an attorney, but I am giving this disclosure. This is information as of right now from the SBA, meaning that it is changing every moment. So I went to bed last night, there was a different set of rules. I woke up this morning and I had an email of a new set of rules. So please note that the information I'm sharing with you is as of today and as of right now, and that it is consistently changing and evolving. But if you do check our website at sbtdc.org, we are updating our website to go with what our new rules and regulations that we're getting from SBA. So I thank you, and I'll definitely be able to answer any questions when that time permits. But just know that things are changing constantly, and these are the current programs that are being offered by the federal government, or more importantly through the SBA program as it relates to small businesses.
Is it my turn, Vicki?
Yes, thanks, Latasha. Gary, I think I froze. So Gary, take it away and talk about the general business stuff. That'd be awesome.
Yeah, awesome. And before I even introduce myself, I have a couple of comments that I want to add on to what Latasha was talking about, where first of all, the link they sent has some great resources. I do recommend you check out what their organization has put through in terms of being able to sort through this. And I know the first time I had a local banker try to explain all of that to me, my head started to explode. And the first piece of advice is you sort of want to write off and ignore what you already knew about SBA lending, unemployment law. A lot of these things you want to take a pretty fresh mind toward, because there's sort of the laws about how everything was being handled before this, and there's a lot of temporary stuff going on about how everything is getting handled. And when you approach even SBA loans, you have to sort through and understand which ones were existing before, which ones are special to this situation. I set up a tracking sheet where I wrote down every SBA financing I'd heard about, and then tracked, okay, is this through my bank, or is it direct with my state, or is this federal? So I would track who I had to apply through. And then I would keep track of, does this have forgiveness terms? What are the borrowing rates? When might I have to pay this back? And then I could prioritize which ones I wanted to apply to first. And everyone really has to do that on their own, because everyone's situation is so unique. So I do recommend, when you're listening to these experts, like our attorneys here and Latasha, that you have to know they can't know what you're dealing with, even if they take the time. You have to be able to interpret their advice and then balance it into a decision plan of your own. So I'll sort of lead from that into my own background. I'm very different from the rest of the panel in that I'm not nearly as specialized in any one of the areas that they are, and I'm based in Connecticut, which sometimes makes me feel like I'm calling in from a remote base camp during this event. But 80 to 90% of what I end up dealing with is really governed by state laws at this time. So I'm keeping my eye on what's going on federally, but a lot of what's going on through unemployment, everything else is being guided by my state. So I won't even speak to what's going on in those elements in North Carolina, because I run the risk of confusing people. But generally speaking, I still haven't figured out a great way to explain my career, so I'm going to try a new angle. I think the way you can think of me and my expertise is that I'm a career chief operations officer for software companies, but I rarely work for one company for more than a handful of months. I don't think of myself as a consultant. I'm an operator. I'm like a fractional COO a lot of the time. And my specialty in working with software companies is helping them through the scaling periods of just reaching the point where they're receiving venture capital and then figuring out how to deploy it, and doing it at a time when they don't have a full-time CFO, they don't have a full-time COO, And so I try to support those functions. And a lot of the decisions I have to go through on a daily basis are the kinds that people have to do right now that maybe they're not used to. It's taking the advice of your attorneys here, but then recognizing and understanding how they have to give advice and the frameworks and the rules that limit the types of advice they can give. And that's one of the topics I hope we can get into today, that they have their own language that you want to appreciate. You know, for example, the word opinion means something dramatically different to an attorney. When you think you might be calling them for some advice, hey, I'd like to get your opinion on something, that triggers a red flag where they think, uh-oh, I'm being asked my opinion. You know, and there are guidelines they have and when they can give opinions, and it's important for you to understand how that works. But more importantly, you can't always afford to do what they're all telling you you should do. And you can't afford to avoid every risk that you might be facing. So I'll try to cover a little bit about how you make those balances. It's hard, but I'll try to give some frameworks. I'm going to close on a couple of points that these are my ad hoc slides. They're better than last week because I'm using technology today. So today we're going to talk a little bit about control, but not in the way that you might think. The thing that you should have done already or should be doing or need to complete soon is take complete control out of all payments going out of your company. If you're in that position, if you're an owner, you're a CFO, you're some kind of manager, you have to make sure you've turned off all forms of automatic payments unless you need those to keep going automatically. You got to flip everything so that you can triage and prioritize every capital payment going out. And we'll talk about it a little bit later. I have some simple spreadsheets that you can track week by week and determining who you can pay and when. But it's a time where you have to focus on cash. You have to, from an accounting standpoint, don't think so much about accruals and other topics. It's how much cash is coming into my business, what are my cash priorities, and then how can I take other resources like the types that Latasha is talking about. So we're going to talk how you can reach financial control. There's a more important point on control, which is what happens after this virus has passed our world is largely up to us. And so ignore what everybody's saying about the outcome after this. You'll hear lots of predictions of chaos, everything. But it's up to us to control the outcome. We can control what we do with our businesses. We can control getting back to a normal life. And I want people to really understand and appreciate that going forward. The last thing is this time is really about balancing and adapting. I talked before about balancing recommendations, but you're balancing resources for a while you adapt until you can be ready to relaunch. So those are my points. I'll wait until I have some questions. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thanks to the panelists. What I would love for y'all to do, so everyone who's online, if y'all have any questions, please put them in the chat box. I know that a lot of the questions that we had gotten prior to in the survey were around financial stuff. So those, I think Latasha did a great job addressing. And then a lot of the stability questions have been addressed by the others as well. One of the questions that I have for the panelists to kick off is, so we talk about getting everyone to a stable place and calm. So how does a business owner and entrepreneur know that they can check the box and they're there?
You're starting with the hardest question, Vicki. That's not fair.
I think even without COVID, we struggle with checking that box.
Yeah. Why don't I jump in, and that might help tee up the more sort of expert opinions going into it. What I found with the people that I'm sort of advising around here, and I forgot to mention this, my wife has a business. She's a doctor, and she has 9 employees. So that's our own sort of baby of a business off to the side. That's her life. And so we've been going through each of the decisions there. And I had to struggle together with my wife to help her find calm in the first couple of weeks. And it's because she was used to such a structured work environment and going into something with so little structure. And really what we find is it's important when I face these situations in work, I really tap into emotions, because you have to understand what negative emotions are taking place, but then how you can set plans to adapt and get out of those negative emotions. And so if you're feeling stress, it's usually related to a lack of information. If you're feeling anxiety, it's similar. If you're feeling fear, all these things, a lot of it really can be addressed by getting more accurate information, like the types from these kinds of panelists. So one upfront priority is to get as much accurate information you can get. The other thing is continue to listen to your body, listen to your mind. You're taking in so much new information every day that when your brain gets tired, stop and rest. It's just continue to listen to those stress signs. And then do the same for everyone around you. That's how you can kind of help understand if your organization is achieving calm.
So one of the things I would just say is practice a little patience and understand that this is not a just something that is being affected by you in isolation. This is a global pandemic that we're all suffering, and we're all trying to figure out how to navigate this, and especially for business owners, that is even heightened. So figuring out how to be a little bit more patient as you're waiting on long calls, or as people are saying they don't know or information is changing, and being able to show a little gratitude in terms of that. And I think that's key. So that's what I would say. And I think that's what we're gonna really need in all, is just to be able to have a little extra more patience. And it's hard because we live in a society where we need to know, and we have all these unknown answers, and we don't know when we're going to get back to normal, and we don't even know what normal is going to look like when at that point. So I think that's really key. So practice a little patience and a little gratitude for the people that are trying to help you and assist you and be able to be responsive.
And I'll add, and this
Austin.
isn't any, sorry, go ahead, Effie.
I was just going to say real quick, after the banking crisis in 2008 and 2009, peer groups for leaders became hugely important for emotional support and just helping you understand that you're not in the boat alone. So, become more active and engaged in your industry groups and your peer groups for other entrepreneurs and CEOs. You can support each other through this.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's not like any kind of legal advice, but to practice self-love and self-care also. I preach this all the time, but particularly right now, there was kind of this message going around on the internet for a while of, if you're not learning a new language or picking up a new instrument or doing all these productive things during the quarantine, then like you lack discipline and blah, blah, blah. I think it's important to remember, we're going through something very emotional right now. It's a collective trauma, and it's okay to not be as productive as you normally are or whatever. To acknowledge that and acknowledge that we're going through something serious right now, and take care of yourself and take a bubble bath, drink some wine. That's what I do to get through this.
And don't forget your creative side. You are all here because you are creative and innovative. Feed that creativity during this time. If it's coloring a coloring book picture with your child, something to keep that side of your brain operating under stress is important.
Hey, Vicki, I have a couple questions for the panelists, if I can jump in.
Yep, go right ahead.
So this first question is for the attorneys. That one thing, a question we had to face here in Connecticut, and I'm curious if this is a topic in North Carolina, is the potential liability and risk of making someone come into work and then having them get sick while they're at work. And we were told that could create potential liabilities for us and having to care for the consequences. Have you heard anything like that in North Carolina, or do you have thoughts on that topic?
So Effie, I don't know what your thoughts are. I have heard concerns about that also, but not really anything definitive in terms of like legal claims on that front.
Yeah.
But I will say I could potentially imagine some legal claims if you're continuing to operate and not complying with local and state home orders. So
Yeah.
for example, in North Carolina, it can be deemed an essential business if you just observe the social distancing rules and continue having people come in.
Right.
And I know that there are employers here who are not doing that, but are still having people come in and work, even though they're not taking the precautions.
Right.
I don't know for sure, but I could certainly imagine that could result in legal claims. At the very least, the employees can call the cops
Right.
and say, come shut these people down, and they will. So, yeah.
I ended up sort of putting that in the category of things that are not likely to happen. It's good to know that that risk is out there. It became a factor. It was one more factor in our decision to shut down. That's kind of how I treated that.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a separate question for Latasha on the SBA piece, which is, you talked about the $1,000 employee on the EIDL. Two questions to that. What is the cap? And then there is a portion of that you can roll into the PPP and potentially write off and not have to pay back. So what are the latest interpretations of those two elements on the PPP?
So yes, Gary, so two things. One, the max on the EIDL grant is $10,000. So that $1,000.
$1,000 per. So
yeah, so that's the $1,000 per employee with the max of $10,000. All of that currently is part of is a grant or forgivable. So if someone got $1,000 all the way up to $10,000, currently that is the forgivable portion. There is going to be another portion, which is the actual EIDL loan, which is going to be up to $2 million, which is going to be requiring some repayment back. That's the one that's up to 30 years of repayment at a 3.75 interest. And that's going to be an extension of the EIDL grant. So if you've already in the queue for the EIDL, it's just going to expand on that. And then if I can, just real quickly, just because I was answering some questions in the chat and I just want to make some clarification. So the question around a lapse in appropriation, which is the term that SBA used to say that they are out of funding for the EIDL. The question was, are they out of funding for the PPP? And I think someone put an article saying yes. Remember, the PPP is going through financial institutions, and what has happened is we actually have some other alternative lenders that are also now on board. So what I put in the chat feature was people, organizations, financial organizations, online organizations like Cabbage, PayPal, Square, Intuit, Lindo, and Fundera, and Credibility. They also are doing or accepting the PPP application. So keep in mind, first wave is going through your financial institution that you have a banking or business banking relationship with. If you are unsuccessful or they have exhausted what their criteria or lending maximum is for that particular financial institution, then the FDIC and SBA has now allowed what I call these online lenders or other fintech companies like the ones I just mentioned are also accepting applications and partnering with some online lenders to be able to do that. So there are still some funds available as it relates to the PPP, only because those are going through financial institutions, and there are particular financial institutions that may no longer be accepting applications. For example, I know that Wells Fargo is no longer accepting applications for a host of other reasons, but they're no longer accepting applications. And there may be several other financial institutions that are no longer accepting applications. And then there are some that are still. So I just want to kind of clarify that because it's a lot to try to explain that in the chat feature, but I did share some other alternative lenders.
And one quick point, don't give up if you hear that a fund has run out of money.
Yeah.
They may be refunded. So just keep an eye on those things.
Yes. And yes, so thank you for saying that, because that's why I just said the term is a lapse in appropriations, meaning that
Right.
they are going back for additional appropriations. So that is going to happen, or in the process.
One of the questions that came in from the chat was, what assessments or new assessments do you recommend to know that you're on track for getting to your end state or getting to that stabilization? Any recommendations on what people should be tracking or how they should be evaluating where they are?
Vicki, do you think that means tracking the loan applications or tracking sort of the status of the business overall?
Tommy?
I mean, that would be tracking the status of the business overall. It's kind of a strategy type issue.
Okay. Hey, Vicki, I could tee up this spreadsheet if that helps as sort of an assessment type of thing. Is that,
Yep, that would be great.
would this be a good time for that?
Yep.
Okay.
I just gave it so you can share.
Okay, great. So this is a type of spreadsheet. Are you able to see it, you guys?
Mhm.
Okay, great. This is an actual spreadsheet I use with a lot of different companies. So I just went through and replaced the customer names, employee names. And the way I do this, when I enter a company, I always have to immediately take control over all of the capital payments. And then I have to have a really clear idea of when cash is going to go out. The thing you can control the most in a startup are payments going out. A lot of times you can't control the revenue coming in. So I set up this spreadsheet where I take out the last 2 months of actual cash debits from the bank accounts and the credit cards. And I just set up a spreadsheet and make sure there's a row for every single thing that recurs weekly, monthly, quarterly. And then I just go in weekly where I set up a table down at the bottom that says, here's my beginning cash. Here's what I estimate I'm going to collect for the week. And then here's the expenses I'm planning on paying out in cash that week. These are not invoices. These are the actual payments. And this is where you can start to play with scenarios. You can say, okay, I think my revenue over the next 3 months could be as low as this. And then you go down the line and start figuring out what payments you might have to put off. And then you figure out how to prioritize them. And then what I do actually is go week by week and update this spreadsheet every single week where I copied the tab over. And then I review the last week and find out if cash went out quicker than expected. But this is the kind of assessment where you can then look at the negative numbers in the future and say, that's where I need some financing. And then that's when you'd start breaking down the, where the capital availability is. Does that help? I hope.
Yes, thanks.
Great. This is the kind of thing, by the way, like once you actually, it might be gut wrenching putting it on a sheet. Like sometimes it is for me, but once you have it, you all of a sudden feel a sense of comfort of knowing what's going to happen, and sort of if you prepare a conservative case scenario, you can say, I can handle that. And then you can build off of that confidence.
And I think they asked if we could send that spreadsheet as a template, and we can do that in the follow-up email for sure as well. And you may be able to link to that as well, Gary.
Yeah, I'll create one that I haven't, this isn't one I used with another company. So I'll create an actual template one that I can share out.
Great. And one of the important things that Gary just talked about too was around scenarios. I think, if you kind of think through how are you going to get stable, but then look through potential scenarios as far as cash in, cash out, and those sorts of things, it's really important. We just have a few more. What I wanted to ask the panelists as well is, there's a lot going on, and I think focus is really hard for business owners right now. What would you say are the top 2 things that business owners, entrepreneurs, leaders need to focus on right now, both professionally and also personally, that they need to keep in mind for themselves and their employees?
When you ride a horse or a motorcycle, you always have to look ahead of you. Otherwise, you'll fall in your curve. We need to stay focused on your products, your services, your customer needs now and down the road, and see how you will fit into the world, not just now, but 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and a year from now. And at some point, you'll find that you're back on your same strategic plan, or maybe you've made a significant mission shift because of the influence of this. And that can be an exciting set of changes too.
I would say also focusing on employee morale and just staying in touch, keeping employees engaged over remote work situations. For example, our firm has a Teams chat that is going on every day where we're just kind of playing silly games and like posting our baby pictures and guessing who's who, and just kind of keeping people communicating. We have every Friday we have a virtual lunch together where we all just get on Zoom and eat lunch and chat. Those kinds of things are going to be very important. And then we talked some earlier about practicing patience. I think that goes for your workforce as well. Patience with yourself and patience with your employees. We're all going through a lot, working from home with family members, and potentially people have family members who are sick. This is all obviously a very intense time. So patience and, keeping tabs on and keeping track of employees and keeping in touch with them.
So one of the things I think I would say from a business perspective, first and foremost, is think about things that you wanted to, whether it's a new revenue item or something that you thought about that you wanted to test the market, and see, is there a way to test it virtually? So this may be an opportunity. So look for, look for opportunities to pivot your business strategy, or to be able to try something to engage people remotely or to gain some insight. Also, don't forget marketing. I kind of mentioned marketing, but I just, wanted to get everything in, but marketing is really key. Updating your website, being able to connect with people digitally, whether it's through Zooms like this or videos or your social media, but being able to see that there are some opportunities. We're encouraging people to purchase gift cards from businesses. I mean, we want people to continue to engage in those businesses. And then, so that's the business side. But now from a humanistic side, we got to all have, once again, a spirit of just being able to not only connect, but then also have compassion for others, as well as to be able to work as a sense of community and have some help and let people know, because I think there are some people that are anxieties are extremely high. And I will, one of the things that I have started doing and just working when a business owner calls, my first thing is not to just jump into the business and what is going on. It is to just ask from a humanistic side, how are you doing? So sometimes just being able to know that you have compassion, and that you care. And I can't do anything about the situation, but I can at least just say I do care and I'm concerned. And I think that's something that's valuable with, okay, now let's go into specifically about your business.
Gary, do you have any comments?
You're on mute, Gary.
I was trying to figure out if I had anything to add of value. I really like those points. FA mentioned a point earlier about people getting stressed about feeling pressure to do a lot during this sort of pause and break. And I try to remind people that the first couple of steps can't get done in parallel. You have to do a couple of steps in sequence to start digging out. And you have to make sure everything around your own personal needs, your family life, your home needs are taken care of before you can really start focusing on a lot of other stuff, especially helping other people. So, I said this last week, pace yourself. Don't get ahead of yourself. Some people are going to go through this whole thing, continuing to be overwhelmed. And those are the people that need help. you know, and hopefully they don't feel guilty and they'll reach out. But that's it. It's just everyone's going to be so different. Please, you know, tuck your ego away sometimes to ask for help when you can. There's a lot of people looking to help.
I think one of the points that you made in one of our prep calls too was around a lot of times you can tell when you're in a stable point because you're at that point of wanting to help others, right? Yeah. And so a lot of times when you give back to others, that can also help you. And I think also we all live in breakneck pace lives. And so keeping in mind that now is a time to pause, and it's spring, it is nice outside, and to make sure we also enjoy this time with our families, those that do have families and friends, and make sure that we're enjoying connecting, because as much as this is frustrating, this is a very unique time, and hopefully we'll only experience it once in our lives, but taking advantage of some of the positives that can come out of it. And we need to just keep those in mind. Well, we're about out of time. Does any of the panelists have any sort of final thoughts or things that they want to share with the audience?
Gary and I talked in one of our pre-calls about kind of, using your advisors, and that your advisors, and you mentioned this earlier today too, your advisors, we don't live in your business every day. We're not your in-house general counsel or your in-house accountant. But what we are trained to do is, be a counselor, to ask you a series of questions which force you to think through the information you do know about your business and weight it in a way that makes sense for you and the people that count on you as you make your decisions. So sometimes when you feel really, really frustrated, maybe it's time to pick up the phone and call someone who can take you through that question and answer process to help you really kind of feel like you've gotten your arms around every issue you need.
I'm glad you brought that up, FA. And like, I can see, I can see, like, when I watch my wife and dealing with attorneys or other entrepreneurs who don't have to work with attorneys very often, they will get frightened when they'll hear an attorney say something like, well, there's always risk, or if someone asks an attorney and says, will there be a risk if I do this? And there's almost no attorney that can ever say, no, there won't be a risk. It's just not, attorneys can't guarantee anything. And entrepreneurs are always getting frustrated asking for attorneys to really give an opinion. How do I prioritize this? Where will the risks be? And if you go into it understanding what their limitations are, they end up being more productive conversations.
Yeah. We can't give you the answers, but we can definitely help you get there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to have a day where I can actually say to someone, zero risk, you're absolutely good to go. But I don't know that that's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
No.
Hey, Vicki, one point on this overall series. I want to encourage every participant to really continue participating by filling out surveys, letting Vicki and her team know what you need. They want to be as responsive as they can in terms of structuring these classes, their overall curriculum, but it takes your participation. So please send info in, what you need as entrepreneurs, as employees, whatever it is, and they'll try to cover as much as they can.
Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
Mm-hmm.
Appreciate that. And we're about at time, so I'm going to close us out there. But thank you so much to our panelists, Ashley, FA, Latasha, and Gary. Y'all were wonderful. Next week, our session on Thursday is going to be from 12 to 1 again, and we're going to be highlighting some of the operations of the business. Amy, who I see on the call, is actually going to be there next week. She's a CEO of a branding agency. Then we're going to also have some experts from the finance area and general operations. So I think that one will be really good. And then the following week, we're going to dig into some of the client-focused things, marketing, sales, and things like that. So Gary's right. Fill out surveys. Let us know what you need. We're here to help. We're a partner. And we're just so happy to see all of you here. So thank you so much for attending. We'll be sending out a post-event survey in an email to all of the attendees. And we'll also have a link to the recording if you want to reference anything or share it. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Y'all have a thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.